These tunnels are the first traces of an infrastructure project of pharaonic ambition. Their job is nothing less than to turn this into this. The Nile Delta has kept Egypt fed for millennia, but after decades of interventions, it's on the verge of collapse. So, using an ingenious system of canals and cleaning facilities, Egypt is taking waste from one of the world's densest urban areas and attempting to build a new delta here in the desert. And it looks like it might actually be working. Satellite images show hundreds of new fields appearing out of nowhere, crop circles blooming.
But look a little closer and you'll realise that not everything is as it seems. This mega canal isn't actually completed yet, and the precious water creating this miracle is gradually running out.
That matters because Egypt's future is staked on the success of this system.
And this isn't the first time Egypt has tried to solve this problem. This isn't Plan A or Plan B, it's not even Plan C.
In fact, there's a long history of grand ideas taking root here in the desert, only for them to wither on the vine. So, will this infrastructure megabuild be the one that saves Egypt?
So take a look at a satellite image of North Africa, and you'll start to really get a sense of just how remarkable the River Nile is.
For thousands of kilometres across North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, there's desert, relentless landscapes of rock and sand. And then here, this tiny slither of green trickles down to the Mediterranean and has provided a source of life for millennia. It's hard to overstate the impact the Nile has had on this part of the world. Around 95% of Egypt's population live along its banks, and here, in the magnificent delta that sweeps into the Mediterranean Sea. But more than that, nearly half of everyone who lives in North Africa is squeezed into this tiny fertile strip created entirely by one river. But the Nile isn't what it used to be. The first major change came with the construction of this, the Aswan High Dam.
When it opened in 1970, this colossal structure really did mark a high point in Egyptian engineering. Along with vast amounts of hydroelectric power, it also provided a consistent irrigation system for the farmland downstream. But it also had an unintended consequence, one that would quietly destabilize Egypt's agricultural foundations.
Before the dam was built, the Nile flooded every year, fed by the rainy season in the Ethiopian highlands. That annual deluge carried nutrient-rich silt downstream, renewing the fertility of the soil. It had been going on since prehistory, and is what enabled Egypt to emerge as one of the great early civilizations. The pyramids were modelled on the mounds of land that would be the first visible sign the floodwaters were receding. But when the Aswan High Dam opened, that ancient metronome came to a standstill. The floodwater and the rich sediment it carried became trapped behind the dam, starving the farmland downstream.
To understand the scale of that, you've got to appreciate the full complexity of Nile sediment transport under non-stationary flow regimes. Sediment is carried downstream with a velocity proportional to discharge, but inversely constrained by particle size distribution and seasonal turbulence variance, while simultaneously subject to a deposition coefficient that increases... hang on a minute. Instead of getting stuck on this for hours, eventually having to go for a walk to calm myself down, now I've got this. Meet Koji. Koji is Brilliant's new tutor, and I really wish it had been around when I was a kid. Private tutoring costs big bucks and most people can't really afford it. Brilliant is helping to level that playing field. Koji doesn't just give you the answer, it reminds you of what you've learned before, gives you hints based on where your understanding is at, or sometimes just gives you a bit of encouragement, which we all need every now and then. Say you've been taking this course in coordinate transformations. If you get stuck, all you've got to do is tell Koji that you need some help, and it talks you through the problem in a way tailored specifically to you. Koji covers maths and coding from grade 5 all the way up to university and beyond, and it's designed by people from places like MIT and Harvard. In other words, people who definitely know what they're talking about. You can click the link below or scan the QR code on screen to get started with Brilliant's Tutor for free. You can also upgrade to Premium to unlock all the courses, and right now, the B1M's viewers are getting 20% off an annual subscription when you head over to brilliant.org/the B1M. Now, what was I saying about non-stationary flow regimes? Oh yeah.
Today, Egypt uses around 1 million tonnes of artificial fertiliser every year. But it's a poor substitute for the natural silt that the Nile once delivered here for free.
But an even more devastating development has recently come online upstream. One that lies outside the hands of Egyptian engineers.
This is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Opened in 2025, it's the largest dam in Africa, and it uses the Nile to supply Ethiopia with 5.15 gigawatts of electricity. That's more than 2.5 times that of the Hoover Dam. Now, for Ethiopia, which for decades has suffered from severe power shortages, the dam is a symbol of national pride. But for Egypt, which depends on the Nile for 97% of its water, the picture looks very different. Egypt is expected to lose 3 billion cubic meters of water a year, or about 5% of its current supply by 2055. And over the next century, up to 85% of its water could become cut off by the dam. It's no wonder that the Egyptian leader President Sisi has called the dam an existential threat to his country. In the meantime, Egypt's population has ballooned, rising from around 60 million in 1990 to 120 million today. All those people have to live somewhere, and in Egypt there aren't many other options but on the fertile land that surrounds the Nile.
That's created a triple threat. Food production is being hit by a lack of water, farmland is being lost to urbanisation, and the number of mouths to feed is constantly on the rise.
The country that was once the breadbasket of the world is now the world's largest importer of wheat, buying 12 to 13 million tonnes each year. The fragility of the situation was laid brutally bare in February 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
82% of Egypt's imported wheat came from Russia and Ukraine. The price of bread skyrocketed and something had to be done. It was the Nile Delta that had shaped Egypt for thousands of years, so the solution seemed obvious. Build another one.
In 2018, President Sisi had announced the New Delta Project, a hugely ambitious plan to take an area of land roughly the size of Hawaii, 9,200 square kilometres, and transform it from barren deserts into productive farmland. When complete, it would increase Egypt's cultivated land area by more than a third. But greening the desert isn't just a question of willpower. There's two pretty obvious obstacles that you've got to overcome. First off, how the hell do you get water into the desert? Well, the plan relies on a network of two major canal systems. The first is the Al Hammam system. It runs for 170 kilometres, diverting agricultural wastewater that would otherwise be flushed into the Mediterranean and carrying it south to here, where it feeds into a network of irrigation pipes. The second is a smaller 42-kilometre channel that draws water from the Nile itself and feeds it to around 600,000 acres. Together, these systems are designed to irrigate a vast agricultural corridor across a landscape where, a decade ago, there was nothing but sand and rock. But getting the water there isn't just a simple case of letting the canals do their work. The water collected by the Al Hammam system starts its journey at sea level, but the desert plateau it needs to reach sits around 100 metres higher. So 13 different pumping stations are dotted along the canal to literally push water uphill. Then there's the other problem: the sun. There are basically two ways to move large volumes of water across a desert: open canals or tunnels. Now, canals are efficient and relatively cheap, but in an extreme climate like this, evaporation is a serious concern. Tunnels solve that problem, but are enormously expensive to construct at the scale this project requires. The solution was a bit of a hybrid system. Most of the Al Hammam route uses an open concrete-lined canal, but the sections most vulnerable to evaporation and seepage run through large-diameter underground pipes. 10 pipes, each 3 meters wide, carrying water underground for 22 kilometers before it returns back to the surface. Now, before any of this water can be used for farming, it's got to be treated, and this is where the project has already produced something truly incredible. The New Delta Irrigation Water Treatment Plant spans over 320,000 square meters and has a production capacity of 7.5 million cubic meters of treated water every day, making it the world's largest water treatment facility.
The scale of the engineering ambition here is clearly enormous. But the real question is it going to work? Because this is far from Egypt's first attempt at transforming the desert.
Take a look at this. It's the Toshka project. In the late 1990s, Egypt announced a plan to divert Nile water into the western desert along a vast series of canals, creating agricultural land in a region called the New Valley. It was deemed the project of the century. Billions were spent and decades passed. Today, the canals carry a fraction of their planned capacity, and the agricultural revolution never arrived. Then there's the new cities, the new administrative capital, New Cairo, the 10th of Ramadan city, the 6th of October city. On paper, all of these are part of the same strategy to decant the population away from the fertile land of the Nile Valley and into the desert. But in practice, they haven't been built with the right density or with enough affordable housing for everyday Egyptians. Instead, you'll find luxury developments and investment-grade real estate.
In other words, there's a real track record of extraordinary megabuilds that definitely deliver on scale, but perhaps don't do as much as they could do in terms of transformational change. Where does that leave the new Nile Delta? Well, it's complicated.
These satellite images speak for themselves. Hundreds of new fields have appeared using radial irrigation systems that rotate sprinklers over circular plots of land up to a kilometre in diameter. As of 2024, over 3,300 square acres have been reclaimed. So far, this is real, but how crops are being grown is in part down to a clever sleight of hand rather than the vast canal network. Much of the water currently irrigating the new desert farms comes not from the treatment plant, but from non-renewable groundwater reserves. Research based on satellite imagery has found that the rate of groundwater depletion under the western desert has doubled in the last 12 years. That's basically water that's been stored up in underground aquifers over thousands of years, and once it's gone, it's gone. There's also the question of who benefits. The farming is focused on cash crops for export, like tomatoes, fruits and nuts, rather than the wheat that Egypt desperately needs to reduce its import bill. The Egyptian government justifies this by saying that higher value exports generate the foreign currency needed to pay for imported food. The New Delta's vision of recycling agricultural wastewater rather than relying on the Nile is smart. But in an arid country with a fast-growing population and a dwindling water supply, there's very little margin for error. The engineering achievements of the new Nile Delta are real, and in places they are extraordinary. But there's a long way to go before we can claim success here.
The Egyptian civilization has always understood water. For thousands of years, it's managed the Nile better than anyone has ever managed a river. Whether it ends up as the start of a green revolution or just the latest in a long line of megabuilds that ultimately fell short, the new Nile Delta could define Egypt's future for decades to come. This video was sponsored by Brilliant. Don't forget that you can get started with Brilliant's new tutor for free by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on screen. You can also upgrade to Premium to unlock all the courses, and the B1M's viewers are getting 20% off an annual subscription right now when you head over to brilliant.org/the B1M. And as always, guys, if you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.